Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in your life, quiet but powerful, when you finally stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, why did I ever think I had to become less of myself to be loved? That moment is the beginning of everything. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It often happens in silence, in a room where you've cried too many times, or in a car where you've replayed the same conversation until the words blur. But make no mistake, that's the moment when you begin to reclaim your power. Not because someone gave it back to you, but because you finally stopped giving it away. When you've been entangled in a relationship that chips away at your self-worth, you don't even realize how subtly you start to disappear. You stop laughing as loudly. You walk on eggshells more than you walk freely. You become a master at anticipating needs that aren't your own. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to abandon yourself piece by piece. Your needs, your opinions, your intuition, your boundaries. You bury them so someone else can feel whole, even if it means you're empty. We do this not because we're weak, but because somewhere along the way we were taught that love means sacrifice. That being good means being agreeable. That staying is stronger than walking away. But here's what they don't tell you. Abandoning yourself to be loved is a betrayal that echoes louder than any heartbreak someone else can cause. Because when you betray yourself long enough, you lose the ability to recognize your own voice. And yet, that voice is still there, buried under the noise, under the fear, under the belief that you're too much or not enough. It's quiet, but it's fierce. It says things like, this isn't love, you deserve better, come back to me. And when you listen, really listen, that's when everything changes. Because power doesn't come from controlling someone else's behavior or convincing them to love you the right way. Power comes from remembering who you were before you thought you had to earn love in the first place. When you choose to stop abandoning yourself, people who benefited from your silence, your self-doubt, your constant giving, they notice. Sometimes they panic, sometimes they promise change, but that's not your compass anymore. Your compass is your peace, your clarity, your truth, and no matter how tempting it is to be the version of yourself that made other people comfortable, you now know the cost is too high. Reclaiming your power isn't about becoming hard or bitter. It's about becoming grounded, rooted in your own worth. It's knowing that love is not a transaction where you trade your identity for connection. It's a home where you're allowed to bring all of you, your brilliance, your flaws, your voice, your joy. You don't have to explain why you're stepping back or justify why you're finally setting a boundary. You don't have to turn your healing into a performance. The moment you refuse to abandon yourself again, you're already free. And that freedom may not look dramatic. It may be as simple as not answering a text, as powerful as saying no, or as brave as sitting with the discomfort of not being chosen without rushing back into a version of yourself that was never real. What they realize or don't realize is no longer the point, because you finally see yourself clearly, not through the lens of someone else's needs, but through your own truth. You realize that your presence was never the problem. Your empathy was never the weakness. Your desire to fix what hurt was never foolish. What hurt you wasn't your love, it was that you gave it to someone who demanded it come without boundaries. And now you're different, not harder, but wiser, not colder, but clearer. And in that clarity, you understand something life-changing. The greatest love story you'll ever live is the one where you choose yourself not once, but every single day. Where your power is not borrowed or begged for. It is owned, fully, boldly, quietly, and completely. So if you're in that moment, if you're standing in that sacred space between heartbreak and healing, know this, you are not lost. You are returning to your truth, to your strength, to the part of you that knew all along you were never supposed to abandon yourself just to feel loved. You were supposed to love yourself so deeply that no one could convince you to shrink ever again. That's power. And it was always yours. We often think of boundaries as walls, rigid, cold, and designed to keep people out. But real boundaries aren't about rejection or control. They are about clarity. They are about protecting your peace without punishing others. And perhaps most powerfully, they are an act of profound self-respect. When you set a boundary, you're not saying, I don't care about you. You're saying, I care about me and I want to stay in relationship with you in a way that honors both of us. It's one of the most compassionate things you can do for yourself and for the people in your life. There's a myth that being loving means being endlessly available. That kindness means saying yes even when you're exhausted, or that being supportive means tolerating behavior that wounds your spirit. But real love has limits. Not because it's selfish, but because it's sustainable. You can't give what you don't have. You can't pour from an empty cup. And when you sacrifice your own well-being to make someone else comfortable, you don't just abandon yourself, you model a version of love that's rooted in resentment, not truth. Compassion without boundaries turns into enabling. Generosity without boundaries turns into burnout. Empathy without boundaries turns into emotional exhaustion. But with boundaries, love becomes cleaner, stronger, more honest. Setting a boundary is often misunderstood. It's not a demand that someone else change. It's a declaration of what you will and will not accept. It sounds like I love talking with you, but I need to hang up if we start yelling. Or I want to spend time with you, but I won't tolerate being belittled. Or even I'm not ready to have this conversation right now. Let's revisit it when we're both calm. Boundaries are simple in theory, but deeply courageous in practice. They require you to risk discomfort in the short term in order to honor your truth in the long term. And yes, not everyone will like your boundaries, especially people who benefited from your lack of them. When you've spent your life being the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who makes excuses for bad behavior or minimizes your own needs to maintain harmony, setting boundaries can feel like betrayal. It feels foreign. It feels selfish. It feels like you're doing something wrong. But you're not. You're doing the bravest thing you can do. You're choosing integrity over approval. You're choosing peace over performance. You're choosing yourself. People may call you difficult, cold, detached. But the truth is, the ones who respect you will adjust. The ones who truly love you will lean in. And the ones who disappear were never invested in you, only in the version of you that made their life easier. That loss may hurt, but it will also clarify who is really in your corner. Boundaries don't just protect your time or your energy. They reveal who's capable of being in relationship with the real you. The beautiful part is boundaries don't close you off. They actually make deeper connection possible. Because when you don't have to guard yourself from constant harm or emotional chaos, you can show up more fully. You can be open because you know where the lines are. You can be generous because you're no longer leaking energy to people who drain you. You can be present because your inner world is no longer in constant crisis. Boundaries give you breathing room. And in that space, you find your voice. You stop apologizing for needing rest, for saying no. You stop explaining why something doesn't feel right. You stop performing for love and start receiving it without conditions. Boundaries give you back to yourself. And once you taste that kind of peace, you stop settling for chaos masquerading as passion. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop negotiating with disrespect just to keep the connection. Sometimes the hardest boundaries are the ones we set with ourselves. Not checking the message. Not going back one more time. Not believing that we can fix it if we just try. Harder. But every time you honor that line, even if your hands shake, you're rewriting the story. You're reminding yourself, I'm not here to be consumed. I'm here to be seen, respected, and loved in a way that doesn't cost me my wholeness. That is self-respect. That is compassion. Not just for yourself, but for the people around you who finally get to know the full version of you, the one who tells the truth, honors their limits, and invites others to do the same. Boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges. They are the structures that hold up love. And without them, everything collapses under the weight of unspoken resentment and unmet needs. So when you set that boundary, when you say, no more, not like this, know that. You are not being cruel. You are being clear. And clarity is kindness. You are not being distant. You are being honest. And honesty is intimacy. You are not walking away from love. You are walking toward the kind of love that doesn't ask you to abandon yourself to keep it. And that's where real healing begins. Wholeness isn't something you earn when someone decides to come back. It's not the prize at the end of pain. And it's not found in the apology you thought you needed to move on. Wholeness is not about being chosen by someone else. It's about choosing yourself, especially when it would be easier to chase closure, to hold the door open, or to wait for someone to realize your worth. It's tempting to believe that if they come back, if they say all the right things, if they finally understand what they lost, you'll feel whole again. You'll feel validated. You'll feel seen. Because for so long, your sense of worth was tangled up in their acceptance, in their attention, in their ability to stay. And when they didn't, it cracked something in you that you were convinced only they could fix. But here's the truth. Healing doesn't come from being reinvited into someone else's story. It comes from writing your own ending. There's a kind of peace that only comes when you stop waiting for the person who hurt you to also be the one who heals you. That moment when you finally realize no matter how many times they leave, how many promises they make, how many tears they cry on the way back, your wholeness isn't up for negotiation. It isn't dependent on their presence. It isn't contingent on reconciliation. Wholeness begins the day you stop outsourcing your self-worth to someone who couldn't see your value the first time. It begins when you choose not to chase, when you resist the urge to reopen wounds because you're hungry for answers. When you look at your own reflection, not through the distorted lens of their rejection, but through the clear, steady gaze of someone who has survived, someone who has suffered and yet refuses to live small, someone who knows that being alone is not the same as being broken. We grow up in a culture that romanticizes the return, the comeback, the you were right all along moment. And because of that, we internalize the idea that our worth is proven when the one who left wants us again. That's the fantasy. But the reality is, when someone walks away and you learn to stay with yourself, that's the truest form of love. You stop waiting by the door. You start decorating your own space. You stop rereading old messages. You start writing new pages. You stop seeing their absence as the wound and you begin to see it as the space where you finally met yourself. It's in that space that you learn how to self-soothe, how to sit with the ache without numbing it or bargaining with it, how to parent the parts of you that still believe you're only lovable when someone chooses you. It's in that space that you learn to love yourself in ways you begged someone else to love you. And slowly you begin to realize wholeness isn't flashy. It doesn't look like perfect healing or glowing confidence. It looks like gentle mornings where you don't wake up hoping for a message. It looks like saying no to what almost ruined you, even when it's wrapped in promises of change. It looks like remembering who you were before you were taught to prove your worth to people who couldn't hold it. The irony is, sometimes they do come back. And when they do, you're different, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about your peace to give it up again. You don't need to prove that you were enough. You always were. And now you finally know it for yourself. There is a kind of freedom that arrives when you no longer need someone to return in order to feel complete. When their silence no longer feels like a reflection of your value, when their absence no longer leaves you in pieces. That freedom doesn't come from revenge or bitterness or proving a point. It comes from deep embodied self-respect. Wholeness is yours to claim. Not because you never hurt, but because you honored the hurt and didn't abandon yourself in the process. Because you stitched your own wounds with truth and tenderness. Because you refuse to let someone else's inability to see you become your inability to see yourself. You don't need the person who broke you to come back and fix you. You need space. You need time. You need grace. And most of all, you need your own love, the kind that stays, even when others go. The kind that doesn't leave you waiting for redemption, but walks you straight into restoration. So if they never return, let that be okay. Let it be more than okay. Let it be the evidence that your wholeness was never in their hands. Because now it's in yours, and that's the most powerful place it could ever be. Shame is one of the most painful and invisible forces in the human experience. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It creeps in quietly, wrapping itself around your thoughts, your voice, your sense of identity. It tells you that you're not just wrong, but that you are the problem. That your story disqualifies you from love. That your pain makes you unworthy. That if people knew the truth about you, the full, unfiltered version, they would walk away. And so you hide, you curate, you perform, you overcompensate. You silence your needs, your questions, your grief. You smile when you want to cry. You say you're fine when your heart is breaking. All because of the voice in your head that shame gave a microphone to the one that tells you that if you're honest, if you let people see you, it will cost you connection. But the truth is, hiding costs you more. It costs you peace. It costs you authenticity. It costs you the chance to be fully loved because you're only offering pieces of yourself. Shame thrives in silence. It grows in secrecy. It multiplies when you isolate. But the moment you speak your story in the presence of someone who responds with empathy and truth, shame begins to die. Because empathy doesn't say, that's too much. It says, I hear you, and you're not alone. Truth doesn't say, you should have known better. It says, you did the best you could with what you knew then. It is in that intersection where truth and empathy meet that healing takes root. When you've been in a relationship or environment that conditioned you to doubt yourself, question your reality, and feel like everything was your fault, shame becomes a survival strategy. You take on blame to maintain connection. You internalize criticism to feel safe. You believe that if you were just more loving, more patient, more forgiving, then maybe things wouldn't hurt so much. But that's not love. That's emotional manipulation disguised as intimacy, and shame feeds on that confusion. That's why telling the truth, your truth, is so important, because when you finally name what happened without sugarcoating it, without trying to justify or excuse it, you interrupt shame's cycle. You reclaim your narrative. You start to see clearly, this didn't happen because I was broken. It happened because someone else couldn't hold my humanity, and I thought that meant I had to erase it. But the act of bringing your truth into the light is terrifying, especially if you've been taught to believe that your truth is too much. That's where empathy becomes revolutionary. Because when someone listens to your story and doesn't flinch, doesn't minimize, doesn't change the subject, that's when shame loses its grip. It's when you begin to realize, I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, I'm not unlovable. Empathy is not about fixing. It's about witnessing that someone sitting beside you in your rawness and saying, me too, or that makes so much sense, or simply, I'm here. Empathy says you're allowed to be a work in progress. Truth says your experiences matter, even if someone else tried to erase them. Together, they offer the antidote to shame's most powerful lie, that you're the only one. You see, shame can't survive when it's named. It withers when you stop pretending. It unravels when you choose connection over protection. And the bravest thing you can ever do is let yourself be seen, not the version you think people want, but the real you, the one with cracks and scars and stories you're still learning how to tell. The irony is, the parts of yourself that you've hidden out of shame are often the very parts that make you human, relatable, lovable. The more you suppress them, the more disconnected you become, not just from others, but from yourself. And that disconnection is what shame wants, because the more disconnected you are, the more power shame has to convince you that your voice doesn't matter, that your pain is embarrassing, that your truth is dangerous. But when you start living in alignment with your truth, when you start speaking it, writing it, honoring it, you find something beautiful. A sense of inner peace that doesn't depend on being understood by everyone. A confidence that doesn't come from perfection, but from integrity. And most of all, a sense of self-worth that is no longer held hostage by the approval of people who were never capable of seeing your full self. So when shame tries to creep back in, and it will meet it with empathy, not just from others, but from within. Speak to yourself with the same kindness you offer the people you love. Remind yourself that your worth is not defined by your mistakes, your past, or by how someone else failed to love you. It is defined by your courage to keep showing up. 2, keep telling the truth. To keep choosing connection even when hiding feels safer. Shame only has power when we believe it. But the moment you replace secrecy with honesty and self-judgment with compassion, you take that power back. You remind yourself and the world that there is nothing shameful about being human, that you are worthy of love, not despite your story, but because of it. Love that's real never asks you to shrink. It never asks you to dim your light so someone else can shine brighter. It never requires you to silence your voice, hide your passions, or ignore your needs just to keep the peace. Real love meets you exactly where you are, whole, messy, brilliant, and imperfect, and says, I see you. I choose you. All of you. It doesn't want a version of you that's smaller, quieter, or easier to manage. It wants the full, unapologetic, radiant you. But so often, especially in relationships marked by imbalance or manipulation, love is mistaken for something else. It becomes a demand to shrink, to fit into someone else's mold, to be less demanding, less emotional, less visible. You learn to take up less space so you won't upset the fragile ego of the person you care about. You tuck away your dreams because they don't fit their timeline. You hide your pain because it makes them uncomfortable. And slowly, piece by piece, you lose yourself. This shrinking isn't just exhausting, it's dangerous. Because when you deny your own needs and silence your truth to keep love alive, you're not living love at all. You're surviving it. And survival wears down the soul. Real love doesn't threaten your identity. It enhances it. It creates space for you to grow to. Change, to express your full humanity without fear of rejection. It says, bring your light here. Shine it boldly. It says your voice matters. It says your dreams are worthy, and if someone doesn't make space for that, then they weren't in love with you, they were in love with a version of you that was convenient, compliant, or small enough to control. You deserve love that challenges you to be your fullest self, not love that punishes you for it. You deserve to be in relationships where your quirks are celebrated, your boundaries are respected, and your opinions are valued, where your tears don't make someone turn away, and your joy doesn't make them jealous, where the whole spectrum of your emotions can exist without judgment or dismissal. When you stop shrinking, you start living more authentically. You begin to show up as your whole self in all areas of your life, not just in love, but in friendship, work, and family. And as you expand into your true self, you attract people who don't just tolerate your size, but who are inspired by it. People who want to stand beside you, not above or beneath you. Shrinking is a habit learned in silence and fear, but breaking it requires courage and self-love. It requires recognizing when you're minimizing your own worth to keep the peace or avoid conflict. It means refusing to apologize for needing space, for wanting respect, for being your full, messy human self. It's okay to say no. It's okay to speak up. It's okay to need time, to want change, to demand kindness. These are not flaws, they are markers of your humanity. And anyone who truly loves you will see them as gifts, not burdens. Real love is expansive. It grows as you grow. It deepens as you deepen. It invites you to be your most vibrant, authentic self, not a smaller, quieter version designed to fit someone else's comfort zone. When you experience this kind of love, you feel free. You feel seen. You feel safe. So if you find yourself in a relationship where you're asked to shrink to silence your needs, dim your light, or hide your truth, know this, that's not love. That's a warning sign. That's a call to remember who you are, to reclaim the space you deserve, to choose yourself over comfort, growth over approval, and truth over survival. Because love that demands you to shrink is not love at all. It's control disguised as affection. It's fear masquerading as care. And you are too big, too bright, too important to settle for anything less than love that lifts you up and lets you shine.